no response or input or anything from me, all the way through to now to get the best out of people and engage people. So we're going to be talking about what are difficult conversations, and it really, I want you to kind of think about your contribution throughout the presentation, your contribution to the difficult conversation, because it is only your definition of it that makes it difficult, and therefore how you go about it. So the basis of where we're going with this is really how you are reacting to the context and the circumstances you're in, and therefore how you can manage that to get a better result out of it. So how do you master those, and how do I take this information and use it? And we'll leave you a couple of very, very simple questions to ask yourself when you're going into a challenging conversation as to what could you do differently. So we do have a premise before we come in. That's the next slide. What we're talking about here is there are a number of different conversations that a leader needs to have as opposed to a manager. Now, really depending on where your comfort level is, your comfort with the context, who you are, those type of things, any of these can be a challenge to a leader. Inspirational leadership conversations that deliver clarity, purpose, and focus can be a challenging conversation for somebody. Even thank you, recognition, appreciation to support engagement and engaging employees can be challenging for some leaders. Today, we're going to be looking at negative feedback, where use information to problem solve and deliver some kind of continuous improvement. But they're all, depending on who you are, the context you're operating in, or what have you, they all can be challenging conversations. And certainly in the coaching that we are doing with individuals and the coaching we're doing with teams, we're looking at this and all of these conversations in terms of challenges to the leaders in the business and supporting people to get the best out of themselves and the team they're operating with. Okay, sorry. So this is our premise, is that if you take on a leadership role, it's your responsibility to understand the basic principles of people engagement and to be the person to modify your behaviors to meet the needs of the people you're aiming to lead and influence. You need to be the bigger person. Don't expect your followers to take the lead. Now, if you're talking about a manager, what's the difference between a manager and a leader? We make that clear distinction in terms of the manager is looking after the processes, the policies, the structure, and things like that. Leader takes that and adds engagement, adds influencing, adds communications to that. So now you are starting to build a relationship with people, not just command and control. Therefore, if you're in that leadership role, a lot of people put themselves in what they believe is a leadership role, but still continue in command and control. You're not building a relationship with your followers, so you are therefore not a true leader. Your leadership is purely based on your position, not on your interaction with staff. So even though you may not think it's fair, even though you may not think it's right, even though it might be attacking your ego at some particular point, if you are a leader, be the bigger person. Don't expect your followers to make the change and take the lead. So we're going to be throwing quite a few different models and what have you at you over the next half hour or so, because it is quite a complex area. At Career Life Transitions, we approach this from multiple angles, really trying to ascertain what the particular issues for an individual or a team are and match the needs of that team or individual. And we are all different, and the needs of those teams. So going away and just doing a course on team building or leadership, it may only end up being really 30% aligned with what you need, but actually getting an organisation like Career Life Transitions in to work with your team means that you can have answers to the issues that are 100% spot on. So what makes a conversation difficult or challenging? If there are different and opposing points of views or interpretations of what's going on. One of the key things is your own fears, personalities, and concerns around what that conversation is starting to look at. And anything that starts to trigger emotion in yourself or the person you're interacting with or the team you're interacting with can turn that conversation into something that's difficult, or where the conversation, the outcome is actually quite important, and there is a vested interest from one or several parties in the outcome of that conversation. So I'd like you to think about these things in terms of any context. I mean, having these difficult conversations, certainly you can use them dealing with a rebellious teen, relationships at home, family, friends, giving feedback. I mean, there anything where you personally struggle with that. Now, we are all different, so different aspects of the conversation will be triggering us, or it will be difficult for us, and we'll have a look at a little bit of that why a little bit later on. Certainly, I have a 17-year-old son. He's just turned 17 yesterday, and I have to be very conscious of the conversations that we have. We have filters that we carry around. And the people that are closest to us is where the filter is the thinnest. So that is where you're likely to really be the real you. And if you have any kind of, I guess, your own triggers, then the people that are closest to you are the ones that feel when those triggers are being pushed. Whereas when I go into the work environment or in some other environment, I tend to start to filter my response to those triggers depending on the context. So we use the human synergistics model, the lifestyles inventory, just as a snapshot of somebody's current status, the way they're being, other people interpreting their behavior. So if I start to go into a situation where I feel something being triggered, then I immediately go into this fight or flight mode, where I start to think, okay, which way do I jump with that? Now, we're all capable of either aggressive defensive styles or passive defensive styles. And really, depending on the context of which you're in, is where you may go and where your personality may lead you as the first point. So in terms of your aggressive defensive style, you may go into, I'm right, you're wrong. I want to admit you're wrong. I want to prove that I want to prove to you that I'm in the right here. If you're moving from a defensive style, you may move to avoidance or move to some kind of protective mechanism to look after yourself in it. So avoid the situation, or try and wash over it, get out of it, things like that. And sometimes I've seen people swing from one to the other. They try and avoid it, and when they're actually cornered, they come out fighting, or they start coming out fighting, and when they can't get anywhere with that, they check out. But I guess what happens when there's any kind of tough conversation happening is that our heart rate does start to go up a little bit, and our capacity to think clearly reduces. And we do tend to want, most people are not confrontational. They don't enjoy being in a confrontation. So they tend to want to get it over and done with as quickly as possible. So we start to resort to these either or choices around avoiding a conflict or engaging in that conflict. And I stopped noticing how I'm reacting to triggers, and I'm also not noticing whether I'm triggering you or not in this conversation. So you get this escalation, flicking from one to the other, and it makes the conversation challenging and difficult. And as those move on, because a lot of emotion is involved in it, they are the things your memory and your brain tends to hang on to. So next time you're faced with that same kind of situation, you're already starting to pre-trigger yourself going into it, thinking, all right, this isn't going to go well. Last time I had this conversation, it didn't go well. There's no reason why this will go well. So you're almost predicting tough conversations before they even start, and lo and behold, without a change of approach, yeah, you probably are going to likely get the same outcome. Now, this is the Integro model, and I just wanted to quickly visit this and look at building trust, because, I mean, in an organization and a team, it's that trust that really, I guess, takes it through. I mean, look at Lencioni's model in a moment, but that's actually starts to build a highly effective team, when I start with that basis of trust. Now, I guess if I look at the left-hand side there, through their reliability, I'll do what I say I do. That is really dependent on your congruence. What I say is what I mean. But then as we move around, it's the communication style you have with people that actually is the basis of the trust, whether you're accepting of people and open with people. And Integro talk about, in acceptance of people, who you are is okay with me, that I respect you and I provide you with a recognition of who you are, and that I'm open, that I'm receptive to feedback from you, and I'm open to provide disclosure. Now, if you look at a lot of the difficult conversations that we have, they start to sit in those areas there. If I don't respect you, that I can't build trust with you. If I don't respect you, then I'm not engaging with you in an honest way. If I'm not recognizing you, we're not building rapport and working together. If I'm not receptive to your feedback, or if I'm not open to provide you with feedback, then we don't have openness. And without that clear basis, we can't really move on to a trust model. And as Integro said, if any one of these things are missing, if you're looking at a conversation or a team where one of these is missing, then trust will be damaged. And then it's very, very hard to move on to the next stages of building a high performance team, or building a relationship you need to build with someone in the organization. So once again, as I say, Lencioni's model there on the left-hand side, great teams have incredible trust. Trust leads to the ability to have open and honest conversations. So you see where these leadership conversations really start to impact right at the base level of building a great team, or even having a great relationship with people in your organization or stakeholders. Teams have robust, honest conversations, develop commitment. With commitment comes accountability. With accountability comes results. But it starts with trust, as the previous model: reliability, acceptance, openness, and congruence. So Lencioni says, by building trust, a team transforms conflict into something powerful and constructive. Team members feel safe, engaging in passionate, sometimes emotional debate, knowing they will not be punished or resented for saying something that might otherwise be interpreted as destructive or critical. At this particular point in time, having that basis of being able to have that open conversation is where the whole model starts, and also where the whole model starts to break down. If you have a leader that is, or I should say a manager, that is shooting the messenger, that is driving unrealistic expectations, that is setting unrealistic timelines, has a perfectionist bent, those kind of things start to erode the relationship and drive difficult conversations, but also mean that the team or the individual is stuck at that base level. So you need constructive feedback if you can build trust, and you can't build trust if you can't effectively manage difficult conversations. So I guess I wanted to relate a quick story. This is a true story. This has come out of one of the clients we're working with. It's in the health industry. So you can imagine, especially with COVID going on and what have you, there's a lot of focus on the responsibilities of managers to ensure that policies, procedures are all followed and ticked absolutely by the letter. So you have a manager, and we're moving into night shift. So through the night shift, there was a bit of a breakdown in communication between the two supervisors going on night shift, which meant that there was a 2-hour gap between one manager going and the next manager coming in, although they should have overlapped. Now, the two supervisors were communicating with each other, but somehow that communication got missed. So as a result of that, the organization was, I guess, likely to be exposed. It wasn't actually exposed because nothing major happened, but it certainly set up a situation where the supervisors likely exposed that organization to some issues, and that reflected directly back on the manager. So when the manager found out that those policies and procedures had been breached, her reaction was very, very strong. So she marched down, got the two people in the office one by one and proceeded to tear strips off them for their failure to cover the shift, which would have made her look bad had it been exposed. And maybe it did. I'm not quite sure on that story. So you have the situation here where you have people really being treated as if the actions they undertook were malicious. So they're being scolded and spoken to as if they have gone out of their way somehow to damage the reputation of the manager or put the business at risk, which is absolutely so far from the actual situation. But the manager never took the time to figure that out, reacting very strongly on what this means to me. All right, and I need to go and fix this. So that's the start of the story. I guess then what happened, and this is where it ends up in the HR department, those two managers, one goes on stress leave for a week and the other places a bullying complaint in against the manager. So the supervisors now, they're now almost down to supervisors in an industry which is screaming out for people. I guess the end of that was that HR now spent almost weeks trying to resolve this problem, that the organisation ended up with some kind of court action around the bullying complaint, that they have a supervisor that's now totally engaged when they were engaged. I guess the whole thing just went south in an enormous big hurry. Now, going back and having a look and saying, okay, how could that manager have dealt with that situation differently is where the whole thing starts. And that's the difference between the manager being a manager or the manager stepping up into a leadership role. Because I see it a lot. Managers, a lot of people in senior roles don't want to be seen to be wrong. And that's one of the things that drives them. And it drives this perfectionistic approach to their work, which, as we know, is good and bad. And having that manager being exposed in that way has triggered a response from her, which has led to some really negative impacts through the organisation. So what's going under the surface? Now, this is a CBT model, but I just wanted to, I guess, expose a little bit more about everything that's going on. We all have a life history. We start to build those core beliefs about ourselves, and sometimes those core beliefs can relate to, I guess, the three things the CBT talks about, which may be your underlying triggers, whether I'm unlovable, unworthy, or helpless. So we start to build assumptions, attitudes, and rules in our head to protect ourselves from what we may believe about ourselves. And we build coping strategies around that, including a need to feel status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And they are the definitions of the things that are going on in our heads. If we start to have a conversation that then impacts on our core beliefs, then we start to drive straight into automatic thoughts, which are related to our core beliefs. We start to add meaning to those thoughts based on our coping strategies, and we feel an emotional response and a physical response. As I said to you, emotional response is our triggers. Our physical response may be a heart rate increase, things like that, where you're actually now physically feeling that you're under threat, and we have a behavior roll out there. And if that, depending on how much I've triggered some of those core beliefs and attacked your coping strategies, that may be where the strength of that behavior comes from. And this is that David Rock's SCARF model, as you see. Now, we look at this and say, okay, if you're doing any kind of change, any kind of communication, when anything is done poorly, what is it you're triggering? And certainly, if I'm having a conversation, if status is important to me and someone that reports to me is challenging my status, they may get a reaction. But the opposite is true, because I mean, this is a dynamic model that I'm triggering you, you're triggering me. Certainty, some people are looking for certainty. If I don't provide that, then I might trigger a response from them. And depending how deep they feel about the need for certainty will depend on the strength of the response. Or autonomy, relatedness, or fairness. These are the five that David Rock talks about, where communications, when done poorly, can trigger that. So I guess as a leader, these are the kind of models, and there's a couple of basic ones that can just provide a window to look through at the situation you're in and say, okay, what am I doing here? What is the conversation I'm about to have? Is that likely to impact on one of these 5 things? And if you know your people, you may start to get a little bit of a sense as to what their triggers are. And also for you, when they start to come back and you can see how they're triggering you, that you stop, think, and manage your reaction to those triggers in yourself. Because as I said right at the beginning, you are the leader. It is up to you to recognize and modify your behavior for the people you lead and want to influence. It's not up to them. Okay. And I think a lot of leaders do feel that when they're threatened, that it's the reports that are the ones that need to modify to suit the leader. Well, no. Our belief is that leadership is based on a servant model, that I need to recognize my behavior, recognize where I may be triggering you, and also recognize where you are triggering me and manage those 2 situations. So we talk about a DISC is one of the models that we use, certainly when we're working with teams. It's quite a good basic model that starts to talk about personalities and where I'm interacting. Now, we all come from it. If you know the DISC model, we come to look at work and the environment we're operating in, and DISC talks about it in 4 different models. Whether I'm trying to high D, dominance, high I, influence, steadiness as S, or conscientiousness as C. So we're looking at the workplace and our interactions with people in a different way. Now, if I move on and have a look at that, and I look at, all right, what are my strengths and weaknesses in terms, or challenges in terms of my DISC when I'm communicating with people? So if I have high dominance, I'm very, very comfortable with straightforwardness. I can just tell it the way it is. But when I'm getting some feedback from you, I may have trouble accepting that. If my key DISC profile looks at influence as being my major strength, then I will be very comfortable with being open and available to you. But because I'm trying to keep everybody happy, I may not be so good at maintaining reliability of doing what I say I'm going to do, because I'm actually taking on so much to keep everyone happy. If you're in the steadiness area there, you're very good at taking feedback, but you may not be comfortable with providing direct feedback when you're not happy about the situation you're in. In the conscientious, you'll be very, very reliable, because it's very important for you to be reliable, but being open is going to be a challenge. Now, the reason I put this here is because we're all sitting somewhere in one of these models, and we all have different challenges into the difficult conversations or challenging conversations that we have in leadership. So knowing what your profile is can start to provide some background as to, all right, what are the strengths and challenges that I have in the conversation, because I'm now in a leadership role where I'm interacting with people that come from each of all of these areas. And the bigger your team is, the more likely you are having a mix. And in fact, a very, very strong team does have quite a balanced mix of people in the dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness areas there. But if I'm leading that team, then what is my profile, and what is likely to trigger me, and what will be challenging for me to face in terms of the conversations I'm having either with the team or with an individual in the team. And we certainly use the DISC profile. It's an 8-minute profile. And it really does provide a fantastic framework to look at your style, what kind of conversations you are likely to have, and what is going to start to trigger you as a result of those conversations, and how to work with the team with that leadership conversation. Now, you may have not seen the ladder of influence. It's been around a long time, but I guess this is what starts to trigger us. So we look at real data and experience, and that's just something that happens. Now, that It can be an event that happens, it can be a conversation that happens, it can be something we observe. It doesn't matter what it is, but we will filter it. I mean, that's why these days a lot of courts won't take eyewitnesses to traffic accidents or things like that, because people who are under enormous stress really start to filter the information they're getting through. So there's a car accident and someone says, well, the red car hit the blue car, and someone else will say, well, no, it was a yellow car that hit a green car. It's we really filter that information quite quickly. Now, it really depends on your own background and what have you as to what you have experienced in the past. And as I said to you before, if you've had difficult conversations and challenging conversations and they haven't gone well, then already now you're starting to affix meaning and make assumptions about what's going on there. And we start to think we know what other people's motivations are. And this is where it gets quite challenging as well, because we don't know what other people's motivations are. And I certainly have found in my many, many years in business, when I see a conversation going south, one of the primary primary assumptions that someone has made in that is that someone has done something malicious. And if you think about your kids dropping milk when they pull it out of the refrigerator, or you're in a hurry, you're a mum heading to work, the kids have done something, you almost react, even though in the back of your mind you may recognize that it wasn't done maliciously. Your reaction does appear to be that it was done maliciously. So we roll that into workplace where, under an enormous amount of stress, someone does something that starts to trip the team up a little bit, and suddenly now we are acting as if they have done something maliciously. Now, I've never worked with a team or with an individual, regardless of how, I guess, dysfunctional their behaviour is and in its impact on others, that actually is there to maliciously and negatively impact on the business or relationships. Most people are there to do the very best they can. But we draw conclusions, we form beliefs as to what's happened, and then we take action, we do something. And if you have a look at the situation that happened before, you had two supervisors who accidentally didn't communicate clearly enough. It's gone to the manager. The manager has had a look at that, selected the data they've maliciously messed up. That's going to make me look bad. We're fixing meaning to it, make assumptions. They've done this to deliberately just to prove a point. All right, I've come to a conclusion here. They need to go down, and I need to go down there and sort them out, and I go down and do that. And then it has just a massive impact, whereas just that initial interpretation, what really happened, going back to the base level, probably would have saved a lot of those issues. So have you thought about yourself? What is your defensive style? Do you move to a passive where you're approval seeking, you're looking for agreement for the sake of escaping that conversation, or conventional, falling back to rules or blaming others, or just purely withdrawing yourself to the situation? Or do you become aggressive? Do you try to control? Do you set up win-lose scenarios? Do you start tackling and labeling people? Or are you moving to a constructive point when you feel like that conversation has suddenly gone from a normal conversation to a challenging conversation? And sometimes that challenging conversation is one you're preparing for, if you are having to have that conversation where there are redundancies in your organization or there's poor performance. Other times these challenging conversations can absolutely blow up in your face. I remember one situation, just saying one sentence to an employee who was really in a bad space at that particular point in time, and that just blew back up in my face in a second. I was left absolutely gobsmacked that I was suddenly now thrust into a very challenging conversation. So, constructive pathways. Now, I always frame things professional or personal, because it's very, very difficult to have a conversation with someone who is now saying, that's none of your business. I'm not happy with your hygiene. I'm not happy with the way you're working and what have you. What's going on? Well, that's none of your business. No, this is not a personal conversation. This is a professional conversation. But I would always say, right, whenever I've made an error, I haven't gone back and checked the facts. Maybe I've taken opinions, but I haven't actually gone back and clarified what are the actual facts. Now, given the facts, the very, very first question you always want to ask yourself is, what do I want to happen out of this? What is the end result I want? Now, that question is very, very important, because I don't think people think through that. I mean, I'm sure the manager at the beginning of the conversation, the example I gave before, was not thinking, I want to end up in court, I want to disenfranchise a supervisor, and I want to reduce my staff by 10%. I don't think that was what she was looking for when she started on her pathway. So what do you really want to happen out of this? Now, next thing is suspending your problematic inner voice and emotion. Listen carefully and genuinely and be prepared to share the impact it has on you. So this is really suspending those assumptions as we start to move up into the ladder of inference, going back and saying, okay, let me just park this for a second. Let me park the little voice in my head that's telling me your ego is being attacked here, and let me actually try and understand exactly what's going on. We're paying attention constantly to and acknowledging the feelings and behaviors of yours and theirs, to suspend the malicious intention assumption and explore the something is missing here angle. We want to be exploring different interpretations and stories and using inquiry as to, right, how did we end up at this particular point in time? What are the assumptions we're making here, and where have those breakdowns occurred? I'm always listening intently, I'm mirroring, I'm paraphrasing, I'm practicing curious engagement. And then I'm careful about the language I choose to use as well, because I'm recognizing that I have the opportunity to trigger someone in the same way as they maybe have that opportunity to trigger me. So while I am suspending my own triggers and making different choices about that, and that's a lot about what the coaching we do is providing people with that opportunity to look at how they're automatically responding to something and making different choices about that. I'm very, very careful about the language I use, that I'm not inflaming the situation. And then the next phase of that is, well, I need to move into problem solving model. How do we move forward from here? What are the actions we're going to take? So you see that managing, I guess, those challenging conversations really comes back to, as a leader in the organization, of your understanding of your people, your understanding that people look at the world differently, your understanding that people are triggered by different things and that you are triggered, and it's a misinterpretation, the misconnection of those triggers and communications that is actually escalating challenging conversations and difficult leadership conversations. So in summary, if your aim for a difficult conversation falls into one of these categories, stop and rethink. If you want to prove you're right and they're wrong, stop. If you want to punish them for their perceived mistake or error, stop. If you think there is some malicious intent around their action, stop. If you're ignoring their story just to deliver yours, stop. If you want to sweep it all under the carpet and what have you and just move on, stop. If it's about protecting your ego, either your title, your office, your position, stop. If you want to force your views and ideas on others, stop. Or if you want to reject anything that isn't your idea, that's another reason to stop. So think about, what is the outcome you want from this? Be the bigger person. What emotions or feeling are arising between the two people, and what is really happening here? Let's dissect it and really understand what's going on. So if you can start a conversation and take those three things into account, at any point where you're in a difficult conversation, you're about to start, that you're aware of it, or that you're suddenly thrust into a challenging conversation, if you can sit back, stop, and really start to analyze those three questions and park some of those things I've mentioned as being stoppers, then that will certainly start you on the path to turning those difficult conversations into conversations that are much more constructive. So you're not swinging back and forth from passive defensive to aggressive defensive. So as I said to you at the beginning, career life transitions, we do a lot of work in coaching for individuals and coaching with team development, and the conversation, those leadership conversations, really, what does a leader have? It's what people see the leader do, and it's what they hear the leader say. So leadership conversations are extremely important, and it separates a manager from a leader. So Mel, I think that brings us to the end. We certainly work with a lot of organisations. I'll just show you that slide, but I'll introduce Mel back into the conversation.
Thanks, Peter, and everyone. I hope you found that valuable. If you do have any questions, please write them in the group chat. Prior to the presentation starting, we did have some few questions on registration, which I'm sure have been answered, but I thought I would address a few of them. One thing that we find that we most often get asked to assist companies with is when leaders, you know, enjoy being friends with their employees, but find it really challenging to step into their role as a manager and how to behave as a leader. Would you like to comment on that one, Peter?
Yes, I mean, I don't think there are issues with building trust on in terms of building that relationship, because as I said at the beginning, leadership is about building that relationship. But a relationship you're having with somebody where now you are withholding certain aspects of that relationship is not really a true trusting relationship. If you have a very, very close friend, you should be able to say to your close friend, look, when you did that, that made me feel uncomfortable, or when this is going on, I'm not comfortable with that. And they are able to have that conversation with you. So just be very, very careful about what your definition of being a friend in leadership is, because if it is a true friendship relationship and is a true trusting relationship, then you are having open and honest conversations. But I think where a leader misinterprets that relationship as a friendly relationship is when they're actually withholding part of who they are in order to engage in that relationship. And that is more like approval seeking or dependency rather than a true relationship. So if you're in a leadership role and you feel you need to be friends with the people you're working with, then you are not doing yourself or them any service whatsoever. In fact, you are probably catering to their needs and not really looking at what you need to get out of this relationship.
Thanks, Peter. Another comment that we had was a new senior manager who is a terrible listener. When meeting with him, the conversation always turns to him and how he has dealt with something previously or how he's experienced past situations. The feeling of being talked to, or talked at rather, and not listened to.
Well, I guess once again, if you're putting yourself in that situation, then and I guess not calling it as it occurs is probably the basis of that. Now, if I'm in a situation I want to engage with that person, I'm in a subservient position there. I guess what's really going on here? Well, you're being lectured to. Why not call it? That's what I would say. Tell someone how you're feeling about that conversation. And start to address it in a different way. I know I said at the beginning, if you are in a leadership role, it's up to you to manage your interaction with people. Don't expect the junior person to do that. But if you find yourself in that situation, maybe it is you that needs to conduct that conversation. And how wouldn't that hurt you in your career, taking that responsibility? So I would say in that situation, you really call it for what it is. Look at what you want to get out of it. Start to talk about your emotions and being much more open with how you're feeling and providing that feedback to that individual, and see how you go with that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. Another question, is it wrong to directly have discussions on how to continue or move on and focus on what should we do next without talking about how things have gone bad previously or what has caused the issue, etc.? Is it considered as sweeping under the carpet?
I would say yes. I think if you're moving on, and this is even in a relationship, I've seen a lot of relationships where couples have an argument, they get swept on the carpet, the argument happens again, swept on the carpet and what have you. You're not going back and confronting some of the basic issues there. History will repeat itself, and at a certain point, that starts to mold behaviour that fits into that, and it's not building on a trusting relationship, and it will fall down at some particular point in time. So I would say if you are having team conversation issues, if you've had integration or engagement issues at some point, that an honest, open conversation, a leadership conversation will be, right, let's get this all out on the table, let's have this open conversation so that we're all on the same page, so we can start from zero and agree how we're going to interact with each other differently to get a better result.
Thanks, Peter, for clarifying that. And just one last question, or more around the topic. This is a really difficult conversation to have, but the restructuring and the impact on the 50+ cohort, which may not be ready to retire yet.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting situation. We certainly do a lot of work in the age area and working with organisations and trying to support them. One of the key problems with that is the HR have certain restrictions about how they can interact with people moving towards retirement and the questions they can ask, but also people who are moving into retirement now that people are living longer. Their financial security is certainly not as stable as it possibly was 20, 30 years ago. That you now have two groups of people that are not having a conversation with each other and almost avoiding those conversations. I would really strongly suggest that you re-engage that conversation, get those two groups together and address what are the key issues that someone is maybe facing in terms of the business. And for business with an aging workforce, there's rising insurance costs, there's a likelihood of safety issues and health and well-being, mental health and well-being. There is an issues about promoting people in the organisation and bringing new people into the organisation. From the aging workforce point of view, it's about, well, how much is enough money to retire? What would I do with retire? What do I do with my my social group, which belongs to work? I mean, everyone has a lot of fears when they're moving into it, and we've gone to that point where we're not having that conversation anymore. We can certainly support an organisation by coming in and regenerating that conversation with the leaders and with the organisation, with those teams, so that people start to make some good decisions for the benefit of everybody.
Thanks, Peter. We had another question as well. What does one do when two parties are at an impasse, when the person with more power, i.e. the manager, wants one thing and you disagree? Perhaps they become quite belligerent. Do you just bend?
Well, I think you just need to start explore what is actually going on here. I think there may or may not be egos involved in this. I think that if we go back and actually dissect what's actually occurring here and look at the reasons as to why things are going on. So the exploration of it and really delving down and saying what is really going on here and the reasons behind it may start to clarify some reasons. I mean, I've seen some decisions made in large organizations where clearly the direction of the organization is not what the employees see as they move down. So you end up with this disconnect, but opening that conversation, exploring that may provide you with some opportunity to say, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm prepared to get on board with that. But I mean, ultimately, it's what you're trying to achieve out of it and understanding where it's going with that and being able to commit, because I guess that's the next part of it. If that's the way the organization wants to head and that's where we're going with it, although you may not agree with it, if you've put your argument forward and it needs to be a fairly solid argument as to why you are not going forward with it. If that is overridden, then, okay, you've had your say, you're in the organization, you're paid to do your role, then yes, then is the point to commit, if that's where the organization wants to be.
Mm. And another question just come through. For me, among the factors that make me feel it is challenging to have a particular conversation is my expectation of others reciprocating to what I feel or how I react to something. In other words, I fear what I say or share won't have any impact on the other person. How do I go about being better at managing this?
Well, I think it really starts with what do you want to get out of that conversation? What do you want to get out of that interaction? And looking forward and making that your goal. You can't. You can influence people with information, fact sharing, how you're feeling, things like that. But I can't ultimately make someone do or think differently to where they're at. But I guess taking that fear away and saying, well, I am the individual here. I have my set of values. This is what I believe. This is who I am, and being comfortable with that and coming back and saying, all right, that's what my goal is here, is to express who I am and feel comfortable with aligning with my values and who I am, without having to get you to agree with that. Because I guess we're moving in, when I want someone to agree with me on that, we're now heading into approval seeking or dependency or ego kicking a little bit there. Whereas ultimately, trying to get a result in those kind of situations where you can move away, maintaining your set of values is probably the most important thing. And that's what your objective should be. Whether you influence someone else or not, that's totally up to them and then their reception.
Thanks, Peter. And another one's just come through. How to address generation gaps, having younger and passionate leader to lead a more senior in age and less passionate staff who's got about 2 to 3 years left to retire.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess we're now really starting to move into team building rather than leadership conversations, which is another subject, but let me just address that. As I said to you, I mean, certainly when I started working, there was a very much a command and control environment. But these days, you know, my sons would not react well to the way I was spoken to, certainly when I started my first job. So if you are the young leader that's moving into that role, you need to have a look at, well, what is the demographics of the people I'm interacting with? And as a leader, then it becomes, I guess, your responsibility to meet the needs of that. Now, that really means kind of exploring the triggers, exploring the expectations and things like that, keeping that enthusiasm level. But what is it you're trying to achieve? I mean, you do have a set of outcomes you're trying to achieve. Therefore, the way you interact and engage with your people is a key indicator as whether you're going to achieve that or not. If you are someone who is in that retirement mode and what have you, and you're interacting with a young dynamic leader, then once again, starting with, this is the actual situation and here's how I'm feeling about it, and having an honest conversation with someone about what your contribution can be and will be moving into your retirement is probably important as well, because you may not want to be jumping through hoops and what have you at 65, but there is an awful lot you can still contribute to the organization in terms of developing other people. So there is a role for you in that team, regardless of your age, that having an open conversation and applying, I guess, roles to people in that team that support what the team needs moving forward is important.
Yeah, I guess, like you said, it's about having those open conversations, but also, you know, feeling that you can have those conversations in a trusted environment, which is what you were talking about initially. You know, that's what stems, but I think is the core component, that trust.
Exactly. I mean, if you don't have that trust, if you have a manager that you don't trust, then it's very, very difficult to open up, and that immediately kicks off the dysfunctions of a team. I mean, it's the absolute bottom level. But Mel, I mean, it's been a fantastic, I guess, gathering of people. A lot of people are very, very interested in this subject. It's something we are very, very passionate about, and we do support a number of organisations through this process. And certainly, please reach out. I know Mel will probably be reaching out to you, but if you are having some of these issues, if you're looking at your team and it's not as high performing as you would like, then please let us know. More than happy to come out and have a conversation with you about how we can assist you turn your team into a high-performing team, how we can develop people to have those open, honest, and challenging conversations and have them effectively so that you're in a continuous improvement and growth mode.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. As Peter said, if you do have any queries, please feel free to email us, and we're happy to reach out and have that conversation with you. Also, I will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and the recorded video. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a fantastic day.
Bye.